This is the fabrication of a straight male type N-type connector. There is only actually four components to it. First is the barrel. You have the locking nut, which goes on the back of the cable. The two of these will screw together, and then you have the pin. The pin will be soldered on. One of the most important things out of here, although it seems a little cryptic, is on the instructions it will tell you how far back to cut on that jacket. The first measurement is 0.8 inches. 0.8 inches goes from the tip of the copper all the way back. This cut line only represents the cutting of the jacket. You will still have the braid as well as the foil all the way up to the second point. The second point cuts all the way down to the actual copper pin. We looked this over. 0.8 inches comes out to 13/16, and 0.21 comes out to 7/32. This is important that you cut it to this length, because if your body is too short or you didn't cut it back far enough, then your pin will not protrude properly through it. If the inner core is too long, then what it will do is when you start putting this together, it will take the jam nut on the back end and bring it forward, leaving shielding exposed. So it's very important that it gets cut as precisely as possible. The pin itself, again, that's 7/32. When it gets cut all the way through, you're cutting the braiding as well. It's recommended, or would be recommended, that you make all three of these cuts at the same time. Both the cut here, just through the jacket, and then the cut here all the way down to the pin. If you do this all at the same time, you'll have it'll just be a lot easier to make that happen. You don't have to. The directions don't tell you to do that. But having done this a couple of times yesterday, it just seems like this is the easiest thing to do. So these measurements are just extremely important to take care of. The other thing is that when we pull the jacket portion off of this, we want to keep the braiding as close to the body of the cable as possible. The reason being is that this jam nut has to slide over over the braiding and onto the body of the cable itself. If you look into this connector, you can see that there is a watertight washer on there. The body of the cable will fit into there. There's also a stop ring in there, so it will not go beyond a certain depth. So, and then you have a washer on this side to seal these two together. So, get started. You can be off a little bit, but it's really neat to make sure that you are as precise as possible. The other thing, and we noticed yesterday too, get your cable warm first. If you're cutting it cold, or you're cutting it out there when it's cold, it's just going to be one giant big pain in the butt, and you're going to end up doing it probably a couple of times. So a little bit of bring your cable in, make sure that your cable is warmed up. Now we have the convenience here of having very short pieces, so it makes it easier for us to work on these. But wherever you can, try to find a good place to make your cables up. Sometimes you can do that, sometimes you're doing it outside. There is, as I mentioned, there is one thing that is of importance, and that's the pin. The pin is a solder type pin. It is not a crimp type pin. That means that when it slides over the end of the cable, you will see that there is a small port window on that pin. That port window is so that your solder can go in. Your pin, when it is cut properly, should not go beyond that hole. If that hole is blocked, you won't get enough solder in there to do what needs to make a firm connection. The other important part about soldering, really quick, is using flux. If you don't use flux, you might think that you have solder in there, you might think you have a good connection, but you probably end up with a cold solder connection. The other thing too is the flux will give you an idea when it is hot enough. When you start seeing the flux bubble up, bubble out of that hole, you know that you're good to put the solder in. It doesn't take a lot of solder. That solder will wick around that pin inside there and seal it up. The other thing is you don't want to get it overly heated, because then it will start burning the white dielectric of the cable, and you don't want that. So, getting back to the actual cutting of the cable, there's two cuts that need to be made. Again, one is at 13/16. I've already done that all the way around. The second cut is at 7/32, and that goes all the way down to the pin. I've already done that. Just to show you, that there should be 7/32. It's important when you cut your cable that this is as clean as possible. If it is not a clean cut, just take a file and file off any edge that you might have on it. The next part is to remove the jacket. Again, we want to do this as clean as possible, because putting that jam nut on after the fact gets to be a little bit interesting, and we don't want to have to deal with that. Next, we're going to be putting on the jam nut. Again, the jam nut needs to have all of these little wires protruding through it. And you're going to slide that jam nut all the way in until it stops. Again, this should already be sealed. It has a washer on the inside, so it's sealing against the cable. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take all the shielding and we're going to lay it back against the connector body. Now, some people really get into this this business of going and straightening out every one of these wires. It helps to do that to a little bit, but for the most part we're cutting almost all that off. But we do want to lay it back and pull it away from the body of the connector. Reason that this is important is the other portion of the connector has a tapered end in it, and it is sliding between the metal foil and the wires themselves. So once that gets pulled back, straightened out, just take a pair of flush cuts, cut around the edge, such as that. It should be as clean as possible. There shouldn't be too many or any wires that are hanging down. I've got a few here. If so, just go in there and clip them back. We always want to make sure that between the white dielectric and the center pin that there are no shield wires touching those. If you short them out, then this is not going to work. So that's really the majority, or at least half of the work that's necessary to put this together. The other portion right now is the solder portion. Can we pause it?